a human race have got to get our freaking heads around what this is, because it ain't what we're told it is. It's not about what's right and beneficial for Jewish people. Jewish people are its victims, not its beneficiaries. Jewish people have been hung out to dry again and again by this crowd that claim to have their best interests at heart, like hell they do. That's why I call this Rothschild Zionism. It was created by them, it is controlled by them to this minute, and it was created as a secret society within the web to massively contribute to the manipulation and control of our global society and individual countries, etc., etc. It's Rothschild Zionism. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, not that anti-Semitism means what we think it does, because Zionism is not about Jewish people. Even in its play-out way or world, it is a political system, a political philosophy. At its core, it is a secret society putting its agents in places of power. One of the very few things that Joe Biden, Vice President of the United States, has ever said, which is true, is you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. Because of the propaganda, we equate Zionism with Jewish people. It's not how it is. To a very, very large extent. How many people know this? How many Jewish people around the world are protesting, have organizations created to protest against Zionism? Zionism and Judaism are diametrically opposed. Zionism is state-organized terror. How many times do we see this in the newspapers? Never. End of Zionism equals peace. Israel, stop killing Palestinians. I am Jewish and I want that. Why don't we hear about this? We condemn any Zionist aggression against Iran. I thought every Jewish person in the world wanted to bomb Iran. That's what the media seem to give us an indication about. Another Jew against Zionism. Over and over. Zionist spokesmen do not represent world Jewry. How many people... I thought Ahmadinejad of Iran is supposed to be the great demon of all Jewish people. Look at it. The demonization comes from Rothschild Zionism. We've been totally misled about what it is. Rothschild dynasty created Israel. It paid for the first people out of Europe to go and people Israel after the war. It paid for the building of the Knesset. It paid for the building of the Supreme Court building with all its Illuminati symbols all over it. And some of the people who've broken out of the family, I quote one of them in my book, have actually said, and as I've been saying for years, because it's bloody obvious, that Israel is not the homeland of Jewish people, it is the fiefdom of the Rothschild dynasty, created out of Rothschild Zionism, a secret society. And Rothschild Zionism has been used via Israel to devastate, slaughter, torture an entire nation of human beings, while claiming to be against terrorism. This is the dictionary definition of genocide: the systematic and widespread extermination or attempted extermination of an entire national, racial, religious or ethnic group. Never can what is happening in Palestine and Gaza have been described so accurately. More and more people killed through war, killed through bombing attacks, killed through shootings, killed through lack of food and adequate medical care. Gaza, the most crowded piece of land on earth, is little more, ironically, than a concentration camp. And the world looks on. This is the face of Palestine. Well, tell me what you see. Combat boots. They're another terrorist 5-year-old. And all the time, Palestinian homes are being demolished in occupied land and given over to these extremist settlers who believe they have a right to it because it says so in some bloody Bible. And then we've got this security fence, which has taken great tracts of Palestinian land, all the against international law and all the rest of it. And here is a children's playground being sacrificed as the wall continues, security fence continues its endless way. This green is Palestinian land in 1946. Then we see what has happened since. This is 2000. We're in 2010 now. It's much smaller than that. What was I saying? The systematic and widespread extermination or attempted extermination of an entire national, racial, religious or ethnic group. And I say to these Rothschild Zionists, don't you bloody dare talk about racism of others when you are behind this. Is an apartheid society, not just between Israelis and Palestinians, but through Israeli society. It's incredibly apartheid. The way they treat the black Jews from Ethiopia is absolutely grotesque. As is spokesman doing that, then talking about other people's racism. We've got to go for it. I mean, people, Jewish people, have seen it. You can see what it is. There's some fantastic Jewish people in Israel who are resisting this. Young people who go to jail because they won't serve in the army because of what the army's doing to the Palestinians. Magnificent people. Never get talked about in the mainstream media, are they? And no matter what is said about Israel, this is Israel's response. Why? Because Israel is the fiefdom of the Rothschild dynasty, which also controls the American administration, the British administration, and so Rothschild's one arm is not going to criticize Rothschild's other arm.
Hi, welcome to Truth or Talk. I'm April Bowden.
And I'm Virstyne Henry.
Today we are bringing our correspondent in, Sarah Sotomayor is with us today from sarahshealingjourney.wordpress.com. She's frequent on our show and our third Truth or Talk member that we love to bring her in because she's an expert on a lot of things. And today you guys just heard a video, or it was an audio excerpt for about a 7-minute video, I want to say, of David Icke talking about Zionism and all of that. So we wanted to bring in all our peeps here today, and Sarah, and she's certainly passionate and interested in this topic. So I'll throw it to you guys. So yeah, so what did you guys think of that video?
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because I feel that David Icke has been accused of hating Jewish people. Right? Mm-hmm. And I saw that whole lecture, and then when he got to that part, I was like, I don't hear him say one bad thing about hating Jewish people. He's totally misunderstood. And what he says makes a lot of sense. It's like this classic divide and conquer, where they've elevated one race or one ethnic group of people and, give them privileges, and then, you always have like a lower class, and that keeps the divide, because one will have absolute power over the other by being in the position, and then that those people in the lower position would be forced to defend themselves. Right. And then when it gets to a point of war is just insanity. So, it creates a lot of hate, because when people start getting killed, you don't start to think rationally. That's anybody. Anyways.
Right.
I don't know. So go on. I just wanted to, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, Sarah, what did you think?
Yeah, I think people, I agree with what Virstyne said. I think people get confused with Judaism and Zionism, and they're two very different things. And I really, really appreciate that video, and I love how he shows the map of what Palestine was before the Israeli government started to invade their country. This isn't really Israel. This is Palestine.
Right.
And there were more Palestinian people than Israeli Jewish people, and what's
they
going
live together,
and they lived together for a long time. Like they babysat each other's kids. I've heard anecdotal stories on YouTube, and it's ridiculous how much propaganda that the Israeli people by, and they're put into this victim state continuously so that they think the boogeyman's going to come and get them every time. So they have to defend themselves before anybody's even attacking them, which is utterly ridiculous. The Gaza Strip is a 25-mile by 5-mile radius, and it's the most densely populated area in the world, and they're being carpet bombed. And to think that these civilians are collateral damage is ridiculous. The civilians are the casualties. This is who they want to get. They want all of Palestine for themselves, and they want to drive out these people, and this is an ethnic cleansing. And the rockets that are being sent from Hamas are in retaliation, and they're glorified pipe rockets. They don't even reach Tel Aviv. And this is just ethnic cleansing, and I find it ridiculous that the Israeli government promotes, never again will a Holocaust happen. Well, it's happening again, and, nobody's speaking out about it, and it's amazing to me to see people who are in the truth movement, and they're buying this, media BS, truthers are supposed to, or, do believe that the mainstream media is a bunch of lies, but now they're telling the truth. I just find that utterly ridiculous and insane.
Right. Yeah, and we just found out, too, that the basis for this this last one was on this abduction of these 3 Israeli boys, and it's just been now public mainstreamed everywhere that Hamas didn't have anything to do with it. So,
and it was even before, they didn't have any evidence even before that article came out, and they actually found out that that they knew that those 3 Israeli boys were kidnapped for about 2 weeks, and they kept that fire fueling to let that happen. And then there was a phone call that the people who abducted these Israeli boys, they were speaking Hebrew.
Oh, what?
Yeah. So it's a baseless claim that 900 plus people have paid their lives for.
Yeah.
And it's not it's over 1,000 because they can't even count the bodies. They can't even get to the rubble because they keep getting shelled by the Israeli army. They can't even count their dead. And they don't even call them dead. They call them martyrs because there's something to fight for, because they don't want their death to be in vain. And it's like Miko Peled said, that these people are either going to surrender and go down and still be killed, or they're going to fight and they're going to try to save themselves.
And people don't realize they would do the same thing, wouldn't you?
Right.
If somebody came into America, even just make it even simpler, your house. If somebody came into your house and, burned up all your furniture and stole your food and raped your family and killed some of your family members and killed your dog, what would you do? Wouldn't you defend yourself? And it's funny too, we in our society, we have all these movies like Braveheart and any other movie that you can think of where, the main character has a vendetta against somebody that killed their family, or Gladiator, right? So you have this, people, love movies like that, and it's so interesting that they can't see the connection between, because you always identify with the characters that you're like, damn, they killed his family, he, and then when he seeks revenge, you don't call him the villain.
It's a double standard.
Yeah, it's total double standard. But I don't know, I think sometimes too people they're so self-consumed, they don't even realize what's really going on, they don't really, because it's not directly affecting them. Mm-hmm. And they don't see how it can directly affect them. Before I started researching into this, honestly, there's just so much going on. I was the same way. I didn't know, I knew a little bit about, I just knew they were fighting. and I bought into the lie that, they've been fighting over that land for 1,000 years, or however long, people say that they've been fighting over the land. So
I I think that there's also people are afraid of being labeled as anti-Semitic. There's been sort of a propaganda, I wouldn't even say sort of, there's been a propaganda campaign to make it so that if you criticize Israel and its policies, that somehow makes you not like Jewish people, or being, anti-Semitic isn't even the right word to it, but being anti-Jewish, when it really doesn't have anything to do with that. You can't attack the Israeli government, you can't attack, that's, it's kind of like the same thing that we see here in the United States, but I don't think quite as vicious, but when they say, well, if you attack your government, or if you're against the wars, or this and that, you're not patriotic to your, or anti-American, you don't like your own country, well, why don't you just move out? People say things like that, and it's kind of it's stupid and ridiculous, but what's even more vicious is when they actually try and label you as a racist and say, well, you don't like Jewish people, you're anti-Jewish, or you're anti-Semitic, and then I think a lot of people, because of that, will tune out what's going on over there. So it's not even just that it doesn't affect them. It's like, I'm not even going to look at that because I don't want to be against Israel. I'm afraid to be against Israel. I'm afraid to say that I don't believe in what they're doing over there. But it's very simple to just go and look at the numbers of people that have died and to look at how many children have died. So, everybody can agree that children are innocent victims in this. And so anytime a child is killed, you know that they didn't have anything to do with it, okay? They're just an innocent victim. So how many Israeli children versus how many Palestinian children?
I think that, I see the same thing with Obama, what they did with Obama. They kind of, made it so if you say anything against Obama, you're racist, and I think, or sellout, and I think that's, a lot of people kind of turn a blind eye to that too because they don't want to. Of course, there are people that are racist that don't like Obama because he is black, but they're maybe afraid to say something about like some of the stuff that he's been doing, which is just wrong in and itself. It's not like doesn't have anything to do what race he is, but they wouldn't say it because they don't want to be called racist, or a sellout, So it's just this whole like divide and conquer technique, and it just we just keep feeding it,
Yeah.
And it's sad too to see now because of what's coming out about Israel. Then there are people that are attacking Jewish people, saying that, but you know what I mean? It's like it creates, but not all Jewish people even agree with what Israel's doing, and even if they did, they're not physically doing it. So why would you attack them just because they're Jewish? You're doing the same thing, It's even the same thing.
I think the people who are really aware and really waking themselves up to history and what's really going on aren't against the Jewish people. They're really against Zionism because Zionism does equal racism. The Israeli government has become an apartheid state. There's no equal rights, and they are committing numerous war crimes again and again. And I think I can make a parallel between Obama and Hamas in the sense that they're like, oh, it's Hamas's fault. Hamas is making us kill the Arabs. They won't even call them Palestinians anymore. They're just Arabs. And unfortunately, our media is saying, well, they were going to be terrorists anyway. The children were going to grow up to be terrorists anyway. And that's disgusting. They're innocent children that are being ripped to shreds and, dying too young. The civilian death toll is about 85% in casualties, and the Israeli death toll is 40 people have died, and they're 95% soldiers. So this is really, it's very
genocide.
This is genocide. This is ethnic cleansing. This is a Holocaust. And and nobody sees the irony here. This is an open air concentration camp. They're bombing hospitals. They're bombing ambulances. They're destroying homes. These people have no food, no clean water. They've been under sanction after sanction, and yet the media is proliferating that these people have billions of dollars worth of bombs in their homes, in hospitals, and that's why they're bombing hospitals, which is completely it's a bold-faced lie. And it's amazing that they're getting away with this, and they're also using the there's war crime after war crime, but they're also using experimental gases, experimental weaponry such as white phosphorus gas, which is illegal in all international war laws and UN laws. It is defined as a war crime. It burns all the moisture out of your body and kills you. They're using dye munitions, which is dense inert metal explosives. It's an experimental weapon, and it shoots fine particles out in all directions, and it will damage soft tissue but not furniture. And it has toxic carcinogenic effects, most likely due to the heavy metals used to make these weapons. And fletchet bombs, I mean, look this up. It's just unbelievable. It's amazing that many people are turning a blind eye. Even a lot of Christians are turning a blind eye because they believe the Jewish people should have their land and they worship, Jesus, which was a Jew. But if we're really going to look and we're going to say that even though the Bible isn't a historical document, and let's just hypothetically say that Jesus did walk the earth, he would most likely be a Palestinian Jew. And that's what, so nobody catches the irony there either.
Yeah, I know, and it is really ironic because it's basically it is an open air concentration camp, as you mentioned, and then what even makes it more ironic is then because of the Holocaust, that's what deters so many people from being critical of it. It's like, well, I'm afraid. I don't want to say, that because I respect that they lost so many people during the Holocaust, and the Jews have been persecuted throughout history, throughout its time. I don't think that anyone's sort of denying that, but that doesn't give them the right to then turn around and destroy and do this ethnic cleansing,
massacre,
and like you say,
people.
Yeah, and then like you said, it's Zionism. It's not Judaism, because as David Icke pointed out in the video. What did he say? It was Joe Biden, the vice president, said that, you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. And, and then you don't, just because you're a Jew doesn't mean you are a Zionist.
Right.
So it's just anybody who basically supports this racist tyranny of this, control. It's essentially like a one world government control, because as we're about to listen to in the, say it for me, guys. You pronounced it right. Miko
Peled.
Okay. Miko Peled's video. We're going to listen to him give an hour lecture on Israel and the historical aspects of Zionism. And he's actually an Israeli. He was born there. His father was a famous general, and he wrote a book called The General's Son. And he also had personal experience of losing a family member in this war. A niece, I think it was. And so he talks about that and how, they had a conscience. I mean, they could see what was going on and what was happening to the Palestinian people firsthand, But the Israelis have, they themselves often turn a blind eye, even though they're aware of what's going on, because they have a certain level of privilege. They don't necessarily want to see or want to question their government, because why should they? They have their homes, or they're safe, and for the most part.
Oh, and to not bash all Israelis, there are Israeli teens who are meant to serve in the army who won't serve in the army and are serving jail sentences because they won't serve in the Israeli army. And there are Israeli protests. There was one going on, I think, yesterday against the war crimes that the Israeli government is proliferating against the Palestinian people, but we don't see that on the media.
Yeah.
We don't see that. The majority of the research that I've, read through have been Israeli Jews or Jewish people, or people who've had a deep connection to Zionism, or family members who, as Miko Peled, had family members who were high up in the Israeli army.
All right, so with that being said, we're going to, without further ado, we're going to start to play the audio on this Miko Peled video that you guys can look it up on YouTube. And he, as I mentioned, is the author of a book called The General's Son. He's an Israeli himself. And he basically breaks down in a very interesting and very concise way the history of Zionism and how this came to be and how this conflict came to be. And so I think that's a good place for people to start to kind of try and understand, myself included. Like, I really felt like I got a lot out of it. And thanks, Sarah. I think I got that video from you.
Oh, no problem.
So, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And so we could use that on the show today. So please stay with us. We're going to take a short break, and then the audio of this video will be playing after that, and we'll catch you guys after the video. All right.
This is a beautiful church, so once again, thank you to the pastor for allowing us to use this. This is really beautiful. And thank you all for being here tonight and for caring enough to take the time and listen and participate and be active. I always begin my remarks with a disclaimer, and that disclaimer is this. If anybody here came hoping to hear a balanced presentation, then they're going to be sorely disappointed. I say this because a lot of the things that you're about to hear tonight are difficult to hear. And also because I don't believe that a balanced presentation on this topic is possible. Anybody that cares enough to speak about this probably has a very strong opinion one way or the other. Almost everybody has feelings and strong emotions on this issue one way or the other. For me, it's deeply personal. And the issue itself is not a balanced issue. There is no balance in this issue. So therefore, I say there cannot be a balanced presentation on this. And I think if anybody claims that their presentation is balanced, they're either misleading themselves or they're misleading their audience. This whole issue of Israel and Palestine is covered in so much myth. And there's so much double standard when people talk about this issue. And I'll give you two examples. I don't know if you heard Bibi Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations. I heard it not live, but after he actually delivered it. And he began it with probably the two most striking examples of myth and double standard. And he began by talking about the right of return of the Jews to their ancient homeland. And of course, the Jews that returned, so-called returned to their homeland, were not exactly the same Jews who were expelled from their homeland, right? Because these were expelled a couple of thousand years before that. These were not their descendants either, because this has been a very long time. So these are the people that actually came back, so to speak, are people that claim some kind of a heritage, some kind of a connection, a relationship to the ancient Hebrews. And they claimed that they had the right to return to their homeland, and this is what Zionism was about, and this was accepted by the world as the right. They had the right to return. Now, if we talk about the right of return of one nation, you'd expect that there would be, if we accept it as a principle, then you'd expect that we'd accept it in general, across the board. Yet when people talk about the right of return of Palestinians to their homeland, suddenly a red line comes up and everybody says, no, we can't talk about the right of return of the Palestinians. This has to be taken off the table. This is not negotiable. The right of return of the Palestinians is not acceptable. What's interesting about that is that the right of return of the Palestinians, quite often we talk about the actual people who had to leave their homes. And if they had already passed away, then we're talking about their direct descendants. People who still have the keys and the deeds to their homes, and quite often can go to the very spot where a village existed, where today there might be a highway, and will point out the mosque, and will point out the well, and will point out the door to their home. Yet they do not enjoy the right to return. So obviously, this is a double standard of immense proportions. The other thing Bibi talked about right off as he started was about King David. who reigned some 3,000 years ago, and here we are today as his descendants. What's interesting is, besides the fact that there is no historical evidence that King David ever existed, outside the Bible, which of course is not a historical document, and Israeli archaeologists have all but turned up the entire country to find proof that he ever existed. Today, as we speak, an entire town, an entire community is being kicked out of their homes and forced into exile through violence in order to prove that King David existed in a place called Silwan. It's a community of 50,000 people right outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. Yet the world sees nothing wrong with this. American money is poured into this project to build what is called the new city of David, an archaeological park. And a community of 50,000 Palestinians has to be terrorized in order to leave. Their homes are being destroyed in order to make this point. This fictional, mythical connection between the ancient kingdom of King David and today's Israel. So these are just two examples. And it was interesting that Bibi Netanyahu decided to kick off his speech at the United Nations with these two things. But what I'd like to do today is just begin with a little bit of history. And if you go ahead, hit the first slide. Thank you. People talk about the fact that this conflict, the conflict in the Holy Land, the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has been around for so long that it's really not something anybody can ever solve. It's been going on for thousands of years. People have been killing each other there forever. This is not true. And a good place to start, if we're going to talk about how this conflict began, a good place to start would be on the 29th of November, 1947. The day that the United Nations accepted the resolution to partition Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And this ridiculous map is what they came up with. Now, when you look at this map, before you even hear about the details, before you even touch on the details of this map, just by looking at it, it's unbelievable that anybody expected that this would work. And of course, this didn't even last one day. In 1947, there were two communities living parallel lives. We had the Jewish community that numbered about 500,000, maybe a little bit less than 500,000, that were expecting and hoping to become a state. And you had the Arab community, the Palestinian Arab community, of about 1.5 million people who were also in the process and had the expectation of becoming a state. Yet when the United Nations came up with this ridiculous plan, they chose to give the larger portion of the country to the smaller community, to the Jewish community. And the smaller portion of the land to the larger community. And then people said, and to this day you hear people say, see, the Arabs, the Palestinians, did not accept the partition plan, so all this is their fault. Is anybody mad enough to think that they would accept this? Would anybody in their place have accepted something like this? Obviously not. And obviously, like I said, this did not last even a single day. Because as soon as the resolution was accepted, the Zionist forces, what was called the Haganah, the Palmach, began a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing. Now the story that we hear, the myth that we're told about 1947, and I heard it once again today, earlier today, at the Seattle Times, is that in 1947, after the United Nations finally recognized the right of the Jewish people to have their own state, the Arab armies attacked, intending to destroy this fledgling state, this young Jewish community. And this is only several years after the Nazi Holocaust. Yet somehow, between the end of 1947 and the end of 1948, the Zionist forces were able to conquer almost 80% of the country, destroy over 500 towns and villages, including schools and mosques and churches and homes, and exile almost 1 million people within a 12-month period. How did they do this if they were being attacked by massive armies from the outside? But once again, when we look at the facts, we realize that in 1947, the Jewish community, the Zionist community, had quite a substantial military force. They had a force of close to 40,000 armed men. And well-trained, well-indoctrinated. My father was one of them. There was no equivalent on the Palestinian side. The Palestinians have never had a military force. To this day, the Palestinians have never had an army or military force. There was no equivalent of the other side. The Arab armies, such as they were, didn't enter the war until late in May of 1948. Much of the ethnic cleansing had already taken place. The war had been taking place for over 6 months by then. So, of course, this is a myth. This is a myth that nobody takes the time to investigate and question. But once again, the reality that in a 12-month period, so much was done exactly because that is exactly was the purpose of these Zionist forces. To capture as much of the land as possible and get rid of as many people as possible. And that's exactly what they did. Would you hit the next one, please? You heard the story, Judith related to you the story about my mother. That's my mother. She's 86 now. She's still living in Jerusalem. She was born and raised in Jerusalem. And she used to tell me how when she was young, she would walk around on a Saturday afternoon, and many of the beautiful neighborhoods in Jerusalem, and I'm talking about the new Jerusalem, the Jerusalem that was built outside the city walls. These were Palestinian communities with beautiful homes. And she would walk around and she would see the families on a Saturday afternoon sitting under or by the lemon tree and so on. And then in 1948, she was living still in Jerusalem. These communities were forced to leave. Their homes were given to Israeli families. And she was offered one of these homes, and like you heard, she refused. The thought of taking another family's home just did not sit well with her. And then she saw the looting, and she still, to this day, when she talks about it, you can see that she feels such a sense of shame. But what's interesting is that I remember hearing this story as a child many, many years ago and over a very long period of time. And it wasn't until I was actually working on the book and I spoke to her about this again that I realized why this story was bothering me all those years. Because the story was bothering me. There was something about it that was troubling. And only now I realized it was troubling because it contradicted the national narrative. It contradicted what I learned in school. That the Arabs attacked, we won, they left, and we get the spoils. So what's wrong with taking their homes? If this is the truth, then there's no wrong in taking their homes. They attacked, and we won. It's fair enough. But once again, like I said, hearing this story in the back of my mind over and over and over again kind of troubled me. And this is exactly why. The truth lays in the personal story, not in the national narrative. Can you hit the next one, please? The title of the book is The General Son, and then the subtitle is Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. So the General Son is a big part of who I am, and this is my father as a general. Now, after the State of Israel was established and the Jewish militia, the Zionist militia became the Israeli army, he remained as an officer and had a very long and interesting military career. 20 years later, 1967, the drums of war were beating. He was already a general. And a lot has been written about what happened in 1967 and why the war broke out and who actually started the war and why. A lot of books have been written about this, movies have been made about this, and it's an interesting period. Now, just kind of to touch on the history, some of you I'm sure recall, the Egyptian President Nasser decided to kick out the UN peacekeeping forces that were in the Sinai Peninsula that divided Egypt from Israel. And he entered against the ceasefire agreement that existed between the countries. He entered Egyptian troops into the Sinai Peninsula. The generals saw this as a cause for war, as a legitimate cause for war. And they pushed for war. The Israeli cabinet, however, was not, they were hesitant. They were not so eager to start a war. And this tug of war began between these two groups. It was a very interesting difference between these two groups, because the cabinet members were older. They were in their late 60s, early 70s, most of them. They were born in exile. They came with this whole baggage of exile, of pogroms, and this is only 25 years after the Holocaust, and they carried all this, and they were worried that a war might lead to another Holocaust. The generals, however, were in their early 40s. Almost all of them were born in Palestine. Almost all of them were members of the Zionist militia in 1948. And they were what I like to call the new Jew that the Zionists wanted to create. Full of testosterone and very assertive and willing and ready to fight. And they created the Israeli army. Well, they wanted to fight. They saw an opportunity to start another war. Now, the myth that we're told about this, or the story I should say that we're told about the 1967 war, is that once again Israel was attacked by three massive armies intending to destroy it. And once again, miraculously, somehow, we, the Israelis, prevailed. Because we're smarter and because we're better trained and we're more motivated, and as we heard now recently, we're somehow culturally superior as well, perhaps. Who knows? But for all these reasons, we prevailed and we defeated the Arab armies. Once again, when I was working on the book, I decided to go into the Israeli army archives to learn about my father's career. Like I said, he had a very, very interesting military career. And I was interested particularly in reading the minutes of the meetings of the generals leading up to the 1967 war. Now, once again, a lot has been written about those meetings. So I wasn't expecting to find anything new, because I had read everything that was out there. But as soon as I began reading, I saw something that I had not seen anywhere else. My father says this, and several of the other generals say this, in their attempt to convince the cabinet to start the war. And that is that the Egyptian army is not prepared for war. And therefore, we must attack now. In fact, they said the Egyptian army needs at least 1.5 to 2 years before it will be prepared for war. So we have a tremendous opportunity now to once again, this will be the third time, to destroy the Egyptian army. And the fact that the Egyptian army brought their troops into Sinai and closer to us, closer to Israel, only makes it easier for us to destroy them. Not only are they not talking about an existential threat, they're not talking about any threat. They're talking about an opportunity, a military opportunity to once again defeat the Egyptian army. So once again, the myth fizzles away. The generals, of course, won the day. The government gave them the okay to start a preemptive strike against Egypt. The Egyptian army was decimated in a couple of days. The Sinai Peninsula was conquered once again. The Gaza Strip was conquered. And the generals wanted more. The generals wanted more. They wanted the West Bank, which was a sore spot for them because in 1948 they wanted to take it. They were young commanders in 1948, and they wanted the West Bank then. But for political reasons, Israel decided not to take it. Well, here was their opportunity, and they took the West Bank. And they'd wanted the Golan Heights for a long time too, because it's high up above the Galilee, and there's lots of water there, and they took that as well. And there was a lot of ambition too. The generals, the northern commander wanted the Golan Heights, the central commander wanted, they all wanted the laurels of victory. They had no doubt that they were going to be victorious. In 6 days, the Israeli army defeated and destroyed 3 Arab armies, conquered the West Bank, the Golan Heights, the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, killed over 15,000 Arab soldiers, at a loss of 700 soldiers to the Israeli army. 15,000 to 700, that's quite a ratio. And all this was done in 6 days as Arab armies were attacking them.
Also attacked the USS Liberty and killed 31
True.
171 Americans.
True. That's another one of those stories that nobody talks about, the USS Liberty, that's right. So, again, the myth fizzles away once you actually take a look at the facts. Now, my father did something very interesting. After the war was over, at the very first meeting of the generals, the very first weekly meeting, he stood up and he said, now we have an opportunity to solve the Palestinian question. We can now offer the Palestinians a state in the West Bank and Gaza. If we do this, this will be the first Arab state with which Israel will have a peace agreement. It'll be a bridge for peace agreements with the other Arab countries, since Palestine, of course, was always a central issue. And we can go on living, being the democratic Jewish state that we want it to be. And as he was saying this, a massive settlement project and an ethnic cleansing project began in the West Bank. Hundreds of thousands were thrown out, towns and villages and cities were destroyed, and new towns were being built, and highways, and so on, and infrastructure to bring Israelis into the West Bank. Just as Israel had done after 1948, destroying Palestinian towns and villages, changing the names and building towns and villages for Israelis, the same thing was done in the West Bank after 1967. For Israel, this meant the job was done. In essence, what they did was they erased Palestine off the map. I always like to show this picture. This is the victory lap. These are all the generals standing after the war, young, victorious. And in the center is Zalman Shazar, who is the president of the state of Israel. Israel has a president as kind of a symbolic figure, somebody who used to be something important in his lifetime. And you see the old generation and the new generation. And this new generation of generals is often referred to as the silver tray upon which the land of Israel was given to the Jewish people. Because from that point on, the entire land of Israel was under Jewish control for the first time after 2,000 years and only 25 years after the Holocaust. Historically, from a Zionist perspective, this is unbelievable, unprecedented. But in fact, this is what they did. Palestine was erased completely from the map, and Israel was in completely over the entire map. This was the objective, this was the name of the game. Erasing Palestine, getting rid of the people, and de-Arabizing the country. De-Arabizing the country is what was left to do. That's why when people talk about the possibility of Israel somehow giving up the West Bank for a Palestinian state, if it wasn't so sad, it would be funny. It shows a complete misunderstanding of the objective of Zionism and the Jewish state, and the Zionist state. Because conquering the land was the first objective. Getting rid of the people, and then de-Arabizing. And when I say de-Arabizing the country, this country has a 1,500-year-old history of Arab and Muslim rule. It was an Arab and a Muslim country more than it was anything else in history. So that has to be destroyed. Monuments have to be destroyed. Names have to be changed. The history has to be rewritten to connect once again King David to today's Israel. And completely disregard the fact that this is in fact an Arab country. That it is in fact in the center of the Arab world. And that in fact over half of the population are Arabs. Now, after my father retired from the military, he did something even more stunning. He dedicated the rest of his life to the creation of a Palestinian state and peace with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and he advocated for equal rights for the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. Two things which are yet to be achieved. Now, in the mid-1970s, the Palestinian leadership, the PLO, started contacting my father and others, or Avneri and others, people who were like that, in order to begin a dialogue. And that is really when the notion of the two-state solution was put together. These were Yasser Arafat's top people, his advisors and his ambassadors and so on. In this picture is my father with Dr. Issam Sartawi, who was the Palestinian ambassador, the PLO ambassador to Paris. He was later killed in 1983. And this dialogue went on between official representatives of the PLO and, on the Israeli side, these were renegades. These are people who used to hold, high office of one kind or another, and they were Zionist Israelis. But the Israeli government refused to take part in any of this. Only in 1993, did the Israeli government agree to finally begin negotiating with the Palestinians. What happened? What changed? Well, what changed was they accomplished their mission of making the conquest of the West Bank irreversible. By 1993, the Israeli government knew for certain that a Palestinian state could not be established in the West Bank. The settlements were there, billions were invested. The entire Jordan River Valley was settled with villages and kibbutzim and things like that. There were major cities already built in the West Bank. Entire East Jerusalem was taken over by Israel. There was no place anymore for a Palestinian state to be established. And that is when Israel said, okay, we will begin negotiations. So they allowed Arafat to come, misleading him into thinking that they were really intending to make peace, and basically trying to force him to sign an agreement that would complete his surrender. But once again, when we hear people still talking about the notion that somehow there could be an Israeli government that would give up the West Bank for a Palestinian state, like I said, if it wasn't so sad and tragic, it would be funny. Because as we look at the 65-year history of the State of Israel, it is absolutely clear that this can never happen. Now, later on in the year 2000, I'm sure you recall, President Clinton invited Barak and Arafat to Camp David to somehow solidify a peace agreement. Or so he said. What they tried to do is force Arafat once again to surrender, which he would not do. So they came out of Camp David, and President Clinton said, Arafat gave some, Barak gave more. In other words, this is Arafat's fault. And from that moment on, for the last 4 years of his life, he was vilified, and eventually Arafat died with Israeli tanks surrounding his office under siege. But the myth that we're always told is that the Palestinians are not willing to make concessions. And that is the problem. I think Mitt Romney just alluded to this as well in that little secret tape that was recorded. The problem is the Palestinians. They just don't want peace. Yasser Arafat was willing to give up almost 80% of his homeland. And the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homeland and be compensated, all for the sake of peace. What he wouldn't do is he wouldn't go less than 20%. He wouldn't give up the West Bank and the Gaza. That he couldn't do. They want him to give up even more. They want him to sign a surrender agreement, and he wouldn't. It's not the Palestinians that aren't willing to make concessions. It's Israel that's incapable of making concessions, because concessions on the land are impossible from a Zionist perspective. The whole name of the game is taking the land and making it ours. And this is exactly the process that took place. Please. Now, once again, like I said, the book goes in and out of my own personal family history and the history of the State of Israel and how the two are related. This is a picture of my niece, Madar. And on September the 4th, 1997, she was killed. 2 young Palestinians blew themselves up in Jerusalem, took their own lives, and the lives of several Israelis, including her. She was 13 years old. So when a 13-year-old little girl that you know and love gets killed like this, you don't really know what to do. You don't know what to think, you don't know what to feel, you don't know how you're going to get back to life after that. Now, she was a granddaughter of a famous general, so this was big news. On top of that, she was also the granddaughter of Mr. Peace with Palestine. And now look what they did to him. Look what they did to his granddaughter. My father had already passed away by then. So this was big news. And when I landed, when I arrived in Jerusalem, my sister's house on the ground, I saw the morning paper, and on the front page it already said the granddaughter of General Peled was killed by Palestinians. And my sister's apartment was packed with mourners, of course, people who came to express their sorrow, but also reporters, endless stream of reporters. And after the funeral, she came out to greet and see everybody. She said two things that put me on a path, and I think it put her on a path, and many of us kind of helped us to wrap our heads around this unspeakable tragedy. The first thing she was asked, of course, is about revenge and retaliation. And the comment that she made was, no real mother would want this to happen to another mother. Don't talk to me about revenge. Motherhood is a uniting force. It cuts through religion. It cuts through any differences that might exist between us. And if she's anything above all, she is a mother. She's got 3 other boys, wonderful boys. And the second thing she said was, my government is responsible. My government brought these 2 young men to such a level of despair that they would take their own lives and take the lives of other innocent people, including a 13-year-old girl. The brutal oppression under which the Palestinians have to live because of us is the cause of this. That is why this is happening. If we want this to happen, we have to lift the oppression. As long as Palestinians are denied hope, and denied freedom, and denied water, and denied their land and their homes, this will continue to happen. I point a finger at my own government. And interestingly enough, Bibi Netanyahu, who's today Prime Minister, was Prime Minister then as well. He also used to be a close personal friend of my sister because they went to school together in Jerusalem. That's a whole other side story. So then I came back, the 7 days of mourning that we Jews keep, were over, and I had to come back. I lived here in America already, and you have to go to work the next day, and how do you do this? But somehow what my sister said put me on a path, and I decided, okay, it's time to do something. Because she became very outspoken. And her husband, Rami, became very outspoken, as some of you, I think, know. Some of you have heard him here, about the need for reconciliation and the need to allow the Palestinians their rights and freedoms. I was lucky enough that in San Diego I met a group of people. It was a Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group. It took me some time to find them, and it took me some time to understand what I was going to do. And what was interesting was, I was 39 years old. I was here in the United States. And that was the very first time I ever met Palestinians. I grew up in Jerusalem. I was born and raised in Jerusalem, a mixed city. The first time I ever sat with Palestinians in a normal setting as completely equal people was here in the United States. Because even though Jerusalem is, so-called united and so on, it's completely segregated. So an Israeli boy does not meet Palestinians. I mean, you might see them doing landscaping or, washing dishes. And then I began hearing all these stories that I'd never heard before. This was a dialogue group, so it was not about, accusing or arguing. Everybody told their story. And I'm sitting with Palestinians, and they're telling me about forced exile and about massacres and all these things that we don't do. We Israelis don't do these things. We're a moral people. We're a moral army. We've made mistakes. We're not perfect. But basically, we don't do these things. And my good fortune was that I was around a group of people, mostly Palestinians, who helped me go through this transformation. It's like learning, it's like having your teeth pulled out without anesthesia. It's so painful. You suddenly learn that everything you know is not true. And coming from my background with my family history, that was very painful. But they were very gracious and very generous in the way they kind of led me through this. And I'm forever grateful to that Palestinian community in San Diego for, carrying me along. It took several years. The way now I talk about it like it was easy, but it was very difficult and it took a very long time. And then I became active. And then I started visiting Palestinian communities inside Israel, and I would visit the West Bank, and I began learning more and more about the issue. Could you hit the next one, please? And as I traveled to the West Bank, I would see this. If you've been to Kalandia or any of the major checkpoints, you see the sign. It's about the size of one of these walls. It's a massive sign. And as you can see, it's white letters over a red background, which usually means danger. And of course, it's in Hebrew. And what the sign says is that this road leads to Area A, which is under Palestinian control. An entry to Israelis into Area A is forbidden. It's life-threatening, and it's a felony. And if you notice, there are 2 exclamation marks. So if you're not scared yet, the 2 exclamation marks will probably do the trick. Now you'll also notice that unless you can read Hebrew, this is irrelevant. It's only true if you can read Hebrew. Now, if you see a sign like that, and you have any sense at all, you turn around and go home. Who in his right mind would see a sign that says danger, firing zone, and walk right into it? My good fortune was that I don't have that kind of sense, and that I have many friends who don't have that kind of sense, and we went right through. And I've been going right through these checkpoints and right through that sign every single time I go visit my friends on the other side of the wall. And what's interesting is I always see the same thing. From the very first time all the way to today, it's been several years, every time I cross that wall, every time I cross the sign, I see the exact same thing. I see traffic jams. I see children going to school, which is probably the most common sight in Palestinian areas, is children coming and going to school. I see people going to work. I see shops. I've yet to see the Palestinians that want to kill me. I've yet to see the Palestinians ready with machine guns and tanks and F-16s ready to bomb me because I'm an Israeli. I've yet to see that. And I know that many other Israelis who do this haven't seen it either. And with time, I began to realize this sign has nothing to do with security. The wall has nothing to do with security. The massive armed Israeli forces along the road have nothing to do with security. The terrorizing and harassment that Palestinian Israelis go through when they go through Tel Aviv airport, the humiliating process that they have to go through, they have to endure every time they decide to leave and go overseas, has nothing to do with security. It has everything to do with racism, with hatred, and with a deep desire to keep us apart, to keep me privileged and them with no rights. That's the name of the game. That's what it's all about. And that's the purpose of the sign. Can you hit the next one, please? Can you read that? Can somebody read that for me?
United Nations Resolution 3013 from 1973 states, the struggles of peoples under colonial and alien domination and racist regimes for the implementation of their right to self-determination and independence is legitimate and in full accordance with the principles of international law.
Legitimate and in full accordance with the principle of international law. This describes the Palestinian struggle. Because that is exactly what Israel is. Now in this picture I stand with my friend Jamal, who sat in Israeli prison for many, many years. In fact, he was given a life sentence, but he was exchanged in one of the prisoner exchanges between Israel and the PLO. And the reason he was given a life sentence is because he killed a soldier. He and 3 others saw 2 young Israeli soldiers guarding a bank in Ramallah, of all things. And soldiers are usually fully armed, of course. And they approached them and they stabbed them to death with a knife. And for that they were later on, beaten, tortured, and arrested and given life sentences. But when I see the picture of the 2 of us standing side by side, I have to wonder which one of us is really the terrorist. Because according to this, it's certainly not him. I, on the other hand, served in the Israeli army, an army of occupation, an army of oppression, an army who is sole purpose is to make sure that he does not have a state, he does not have rights, and he dare not resist. So yes, my army has uniforms and commanders and generals, but which one of us is really the terrorist? And finally, and this is also how the book ends, what do we do? I mean, how do two nations share a state? How do they share a country? Well, there are lots of examples. Look at Switzerland. Look at Belgium. You know, these are multinational states. The Swiss are Swiss, the Belgians are Belgians, regardless of what, actual nationality they are beyond that. So there are plenty of examples of states that have multinational nations within them. Once again, going back to this question, is one state the right thing? Is two states the right thing? Are three states the right thing? Somebody gave me something, about a confederation. The reality is that Israel had created a one state. The borders in terms of from Israeli perspective, are very clear. The borders of the state of Israel are the Jordan River on the east and the Mediterranean on the west. That's it. If you look at Israeli school books, if you look at weather maps, if you look at any official maps of the state of Israel, it is absolutely clear. There is no question in anybody's mind what the borders of the state of Israel are. That's it. So the notion that there could be an Israeli government that would give up some of that is absolutely absurd. And Israel governs this one state very skillfully with three different sets of laws. You have the laws that govern people like myself, Israeli Jews, who can come and go and say what they please. Pretty much a democratic state for all purposes. You've got the laws that govern the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, and there are over 30 laws in the law books that discriminate against them specifically, and you've got an entire culture of discrimination against them that is deep-seated and deep-rooted in Israeli society. And then you've got the laws that govern the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and this is really at the pleasure of the Israeli army. If they want to destroy, they destroy. If they want to arrest and beat, they arrest and beat. If they want to torture, they torture. If they want to kill, they kill. And Palestinians have no recourse. This is the reality. There's an education system, the Zionist education system. Like Judith alluded, my sister just wrote a book about it. She's an educator that teaches racism in a very subtle way. There's a bureaucracy, an entire bureaucracy, that is dedicated to making life impossible for Palestinians through all kinds of restrictions and permits and requirements that are absolutely uncalled for and unnecessary, but are all given and provided under the guise of security. And then you've got the Israeli army, which I like to refer to as one of the best trained, best equipped, best fed terrorist organizations in the world. And yes, they have generals and they have nice uniforms, but their entire purpose is terrorism. And just as one example, I'll give you one example. Almost exactly 4 years ago, as Israel began its attack on Gaza, September the 27th, 2008, at 11:25 in the morning, what I refer to as the most shameful day in the Jewish history, the most shameful day in the history of the Jewish people. Israel began carpet bombing Gaza, and on the first day of what was to be a 21-day attack, they dropped 100 tons of bombs. Okay, a 1-ton bomb will decimate an entire city block. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. 800,000 children live in Gaza. 11:25 is exactly the time when the morning school shift and the afternoon school shift change. So all the kids are in the streets. All the children are on the streets. That was the moment decided by the decision makers in Israel to begin the attack. This was the first day of a 21-day slaughter that had absolutely no justification. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. And this is how the state of Israel manages to control the different populations, and somehow still keep up this very sweet, liberal kind of face to everything. But we still have to figure out how we go from here. Well, let's look at what happened in South Africa. They got rid of apartheid. That is the example. What did they do in America? They had got rid of the racist laws that existed in the South. Did the whites in South Africa want this, like this? Absolutely not. Did the whites in the southern states in America, here in the United States, want this or like this? No. It was not done by consensus. But Zionism, just like racism, has to go. The Zionist state has to be replaced with a democracy. Equal rights. We have 5.5 million Palestinians, about 6.5 million Israelis. There's absolutely no reason in the world why they can't live together as equals. Now, often when Jewish people hear this, especially if they support Zionism and support the State of Israel, they go, see, you're talking about genocide. You're talking about another Holocaust. That's just an excuse. There's no reason to assume this is going to be violent. There's no reason for a transfer of power to be violent. Evil dictatorships can be, and evil regimes can be replaced by democracies without violence. It's happened before. There's no reason why it won't happen again. I just heard this thing today about the vast differences between Israelis and Palestinians, cultural differences, the cultural superiority of the Israelis. I've never heard such nonsense in my life. The two societies could not be more similar. Their languages are similar. Their religions are similar. More than half Israelis, more than half of all Israelis are descendants of people who came from the Middle East. They're descendants of Arab Jews who came from Iraq, who came from North Africa, who came from Yemen. Arab culture is part of who they are. When Baghdad was being bombed, you had old Arab Jews from Baghdad in Israel crying that their city is being bombed. There are no differences. And the likelihood of both populations seeing their common cause and seeing their common goals as outweighing any differences that might exist between them is far greater than anything else. And then young Palestinians and young Israelis can grow up and have a future and live in a real democracy and do great things, because this is a beautiful country. And it's got a lot of possibilities. So the name of the game has to be democracy and equal rights, not anything else. All right, thank you all very much.
The first one was, is the sale and purchase of land a viable function, and does it follow the rule of law? I'm assuming that means for Palestinian. And then, does Israel use the right of eminent domain, or is the land seized with no legal process? How strong is the opposition within Israel to what appears to be an impending attack on Iran by Israel? That's 3 questions, okay?
Let's do one more.
One more, okay. Is Bibi really serious about attacking Iran, or is this a sideshow in order to avoid dealing with the Palestinians?
Okay. I'm saying I'm no legal expert, so I don't really know about this eminent domain and sale of land and so on. So I'm not sure how to. I will say this, and I don't know if it answers the question or not, but in Israel, the land is all owned by the state. So in essence, there's no private property. When you buy land, you're actually leasing it from the state. So, and every 49 years, you have to lease it again for either 49 years or 99 years. That's kind of how that works. So, what they try to do, like after 1948, they passed a law that meant that all of the absentee property is the property of the people who were thrown out and then left as absentees, they're absent somehow. The law passed that made it permissible for the state to take over the land. Then they passed another law that made it illegal for the Palestinian refugees to return and claim their land. So that's how that works. I don't know if that answers the question, but like I said, I'm no legal scholar. Is there opposition in Israel to an attack? You know, and is Bibi serious about the attack? The whole Iran issue, in my opinion anyway, is a smokescreen. It was designed very cleverly, and it's used very cleverly by Netanyahu and his government to shift everybody's attention from Palestine to some other fictional threat. And it's been very successful. I mean, the United Nations General Assembly, nobody talked about Palestine. You know, everything was about Iran, the threat on Iran, attack Iran, the bomb Iran, don't bomb Iran. Thousands of political prisoners in violation of international law sit in Israeli prisons. Palestinian children get less water than Israeli children. Palestinians are kicked off their homes and their land is being taken and their towns are being destroyed every single day. People are being killed, shot and killed in nonviolent protests in the West Bank every single week. How can you talk about this nonsense, though, when there's a threat of an the Iranian nuclear threat? And they managed to manipulate this. So I don't think he's serious. I think he would be politically insane to let go of this wonderful card. But as long as he can keep talking about an Iranian threat, people are not going to talk about Palestine. What's the point of attacking Iran? What would that give him? Politically, it gives him nothing. Militarily, it gives him nothing, because there is no threat. And then he's going to have a problem. This way he's got this issue, he's had it for several years, and I don't think he'll give it up. So I don't think he's serious about it. That's not to say that there is no possibility that something might happen, but I can't imagine that he would do that. And you know, people in Israel are basically scared. I mean, what do people know? People know what they read, what they hear in the paper. Every day the headline, somebody says something about Iran. The defense minister decided to say, just a few weeks ago, and the defense minister goes back and forth supporting it and being against it, and supporting it and being against it. And so a few weeks ago, there was a headline saying, quoting him as saying, that the blade that rests on our necks now is even sharper and more dangerous than the threat of 1967. So my first reaction was, he should read my book. But you know, anybody that's knowledgeable knows that there was no threat in 1967, but they want to create this tension they bring back that tension of 1967 where people are actually afraid. Israelis in 1967 were scared to death. The generals didn't let on that this was going to be a very easy war. You know, people were actually afraid that there would be another Holocaust. And they're creating this fear again so that they can continue to talk about this threat. So I don't think it's a real threat, and I don't think Bibi would attack, because it's too good of a political card to give up.
More questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think a one-state solution will work, given that 60 to 70% of Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs and Palestinians do not favor a one-state solution? How do you make this happen? That's one question, okay?
Okay.
Well, and the second one is similar, so I won't read it. Where did this land-grabbing, this is a biggie, racist Zionist philosophy come from? And where did the suicide bomber phenomenon come from? And...
Whoa, let me write this down.
And how could you live your whole life in Israel, serve in the military, and not see what you now see?
Oh, easy. Okay.
Is that three good ones?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that such a large number of Palestinians don't want this two-state solution. I talk to a lot of Palestinians, and I haven't done any statistics, but a lot of Palestinians that I talk to realize and see no problem with it. So I don't think there's going to be that big of an opposition on the Palestinian side to this at all. There will be opposition, of course, on the Israeli side, because when you're privileged, you don't want to give up your privileges. You know, we, the Israeli Jews, are privileged in this society. And the privileges that are given to us by the state are part of the attempt to set us apart from the Palestinians. So if I break the law in Hebron, and a Palestinian breaks the exact same law in the exact same spot, the laws that govern the state of Israel, which are, regular, conventional law, applies to me. Israeli military law applies to the Palestinian. If I participate, or I should say when I participate in protests in the West Bank and I get arrested, everybody knows how it's going to end. I go home at the end of the day. I might get roughed up a little bit, whatever, but at the end of the day, everybody knows I go home. Because I'm an Israeli Jew. Palestinian that gets arrested will be beaten, will be tortured, and will be kept in prison as long as the local commander wants him in prison. It could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a year, without charges and without a trial. And then 6 months later, I get a letter from the police saying that the case was closed because of something, some technicality. So Israelis are not going to want to give up this privilege, but I think whites in South Africa didn't want to give up their privilege, and whites in America didn't want to give up their privilege either, but they're going to have to. Things like this are not done as a result of a consensus. That's why there are pressures. That's why there's BDS. That's why there's a non-violent resistance. That's why we have events like this. That's why more and more American Jews are breaking away from Zionism and coming and organizing events like this. And whether they like it or not, this is the transformation that's going to take place. People ask me, well, I'll tell you a little story. I was asked, I spoke at an 8th grade class. A friend of mine is a teacher of this really nice, special kind of a school where kids actually learn about stuff. So it's an 8th grade class, and they're learning about this issue. And they've been learning about it for a few weeks, and they wanted me to come and speak. And they took a poll among themselves asking how many of them think there will be a solution in their lifetime. A peaceful solution in their lifetime. These are 8th graders. They're 13 years old. 80% said no. So when I came to speak, I said, well, let's see if I can't change your mind. Because it's all a question of what you know. And I explained to them about the similarities about the societies and all the possibilities that exist once the state of Israel is transformed into a democracy. If I didn't think this was possible in my lifetime, I wouldn't be doing this. If I wasn't completely confident that this is actually going to happen, I wouldn't be doing this. So Israelis aren't going to like it, but they don't need to like it. That's kind of the way these things are. But I think Palestinians, the impression that I have, and I'm there a lot, is that Palestinians actually do favor this. Okay, there's two questions here. One is about where did Zionist philosophy come from? Well, in the turn of the 19th century, there was, this nationalism rose, and all these little groups decided that they were going to become nations. And my grandparents were part of that. They were Jews, and they were in Eastern Europe, and they suffered from pogroms, and they suffered from all kinds of discrimination and racism against Jews and anti-Semitism, and they thought, well, maybe this is a good idea. And when Zionism began, there was a whole scope of Zionisms. There were Zionists that believed in a democracy and that Jews and Arabs would live together. They didn't, in their wildest dreams, imagine that they would kick out people from their homes. And then there were other Zionists who later on became the mainstream Zionists, led by people like Ben Gurion, who was Israel's first prime minister, that were radical, racist, and violent. And they won the day. And they gave the tone, and that's why Zionism is what it is today. Racist, violent, militant, and non-compromising. But that tone was given by Ben Gurion and people around him. So that's where that came from. And where did suicide bombers come from? I don't know that suicide bombing is a philosophy. I mean, there are 5.5 million Palestinians who live inside of Palestine. There's probably another 5 or so that live outside of Palestine. That's 10 million people. There were less than 200 suicide bombers. So it's not like, there's some kind of a madness of suicide bombers among Palestinians. Let's put things in perspective. And I don't know that there's a philosophy to it. I think when people are desperate enough and hopeless enough, They see their fathers being beaten and tortured. They see their sisters being shot and arrested. They see their homes being destroyed. They have no ability to go anywhere or buy food or provide water for their families or their siblings. And they see this massive army that is relentlessly oppressing them and beating them. If there's no hope, there's no hope. So we do what we can, you know. But I think if we actually look at how many people actually did this, and I don't know a single Palestinian, and I know a lot of Palestinians, that thinks this was a good thing or supports it. So I think it's important to put the suicide bombing thing in proportion. Yeah.
Okay, I have 4 cards here that all kind of deal with something, so it's not really 3 questions. I'll just give you a whole series of topics. Are you saying that nothing will change unless there are changes in American policies and public opinion? What can we do in our U.S. communities to support a single democratic state in Israel?
Hold on, slow down.
How do we counter...
Hold on.
This is all part... Well, it's all...
but I gotta, you know.
Oh, you got to get them? Okay.
So nothing will change unless something changes in the U.S. What can we do?
Yeah, what can we do? Are you saying that nothing will change unless America... Okay. And what can we do in our communities to support a single democratic state and to counter...
No,
what?
That's fine.
Oh, yeah, he wanted me to read them. I tried.
Go on. Go on.
How do we counter the influence of AIPAC and other Jewish organizations over U.S. policies?
Okay.
And how do we convince Americans, I assume, who speak against Israeli policies to fight the false accusation of anti-Semitism? And what do you see as the U.S. collusion with the current Zionist project? And who's actually calling the shots historically, the Zionist movement or the U.S. government and big business? Those are all related.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot of questions. Okay. Well, nothing's going to change until a lot of things change. I think... Closer? Yes. Okay. I think nothing's going to change until a lot of things change. So things have to change in this country, certainly, and they are changing in this country. Like I said, you know, I'm going to be speaking right now. I'm booked through Thanksgiving, pretty much straight through. More than half of the events that I'm invited to speak at are organized by American Jews. So I see a very big change in what's perceived to be, you know, American Jewry. It's no longer this blind admiration for AIPAC and for Israel and for the whole Zionist thing. Jews are looking at the state of Israel and they say, well, this does not represent us. This is not what we stand for. Thousands of political prisoners, torture, discrimination. This is not what American Jews stand for. So more and more American Jews are moving away from Zionism, and I think that's a very good thing. So that's changing already. I also think that, you know, certainly the United Methodist, the Presbyterian churches are doing a lot of work on this issue. And they're making big strides, and they're bringing about big changes. And I think the more Americans see Jewish people criticize Israel, the more non-Jewish people will feel comfortable. And this anti-Semitic thing, people ask me this all the time. They say, well, look, you can say this because you are you, but when we say it, they call us anti-Semitic. And my reply to that is fine. I mean, they call me a self-hating Jew. I just got something that said I was a self-hating Jew or that I hate Jews or something. Fine, I'll take that. Now, let's talk about something else. Can you explain to me why Palestinian children get no water? Well, can you explain to me how you justify dropping 100 tons of bombs on children? Can you explain to me throwing people out of their homes and making them homeless? Can you explain to me yanking kids out of their beds at 2 o'clock in the morning, throwing them in prison and torturing them? Can you explain all this to me? Perhaps I'm anti-Semitic. Now you explain all this to me. What does that make you? And this has to be the conversation. Calling people anti-Semitic is a very weak weapon. It's a very weak tool. It's all they've got. But when you actually look at it, it's completely meaningless. because they do not have an answer for all those other questions. And that has to be the issue. They're the ones who have to explain, not anybody, not you, not us. You have nothing to explain. These are legitimate questions. You supported, you danced, you celebrated when Israel was dropping hundreds of tons on bombs on 800,000 children. They were locked up in Gaza and had nowhere to go. You supported this. I'm anti-Semitic? What does that make you? You support a country that deliberately prevents children from access to water. Not to mention food and medicine and education and a home and freedom. You support that. What does that make you? How can you support this? This has to be the conversation. And I'm not suggesting it's an easy thing to do, but I am suggesting that this is how you counter AIPAC. And that's what you do here in the U.S. Because these are the conversations these are the best excuses, these are the best thing AIPAC can come up with. They're talking about transforming Israel as anti-Semitism and it's calling for genocide. Who's talking about genocide? I haven't heard anybody suggest genocide. Of all the people that I've heard, and I've heard a lot of people talk about this transition, changing Israel from a Zionist state to a democracy. I've heard many people talk about, Ilan Pape who talks about it, many people talk about this. None of them, not a single one of them would support a violent transition. Not one would support violence. And violence is not needed. So that's how you combat AIPAC, and that's how you counter AIPAC, and that's how you convince Americans not to be afraid. Like I said, I'm not suggesting it's easy. When somebody comes back with this anti-Semitism thing, then people, pull back and they're afraid. And I can understand that. It's very hurtful. At the same time, there's a bigger issue here. So this may hurt our feelings for 5 seconds, but, let's continue the conversation. And that's what has to happen, and that's how you take over this AIPAC nonsense. The collision with Zionism is inevitable. Was it collision or collusion? Huh? Oh, collusion, I'm sorry. Well, I think it's temporary. It's temporary. I mean, America does, politicians in America do what they have to do in order to get elected. Being pro-Zionist is part of what you have to do in America if you want a political career. Either you're the president or a council member of, my city, Coronado. I mean, they're not even, it's kind of a part-time job. That's the name of the game. That's the price of doing business. So I think the president cares more about healthcare than about Israel. So he's going to give money to Israel so they shut up and he can pass healthcare reform. This is how it is. This is politics in America. And that's why a second Obama term is not going to make any change. It's not going to be different on this issue. Because he doesn't care enough and because, why bother? He's got nothing to gain. But it's going to start from the bottom. And once there's a lot going on, it's like I said to somebody earlier, it's like Vietnam. When American people decided enough is enough, Congress said enough, and the president said enough, and that was it. And Americans were out of Vietnam. But it takes that kind of a movement. And right now, it's true that on this issue, Israel calls the shots. Right now, when Israel says jump, the American politicians say how high. And then they move on to the next thing. But that's the price of doing business here in America if you want to be a politician. Is that it?
I have one more question. How has your book been received in Israel?
It hasn't been received in Israel. I don't think anybody in Israel read it. I've had several speaking events and I've had a couple of book launches, but they were all on the other side. One was in East Jerusalem, one was in Ramallah, and so on. And so Israel ignores this completely, and that may change. I don't know, but I haven't had any response one way or the other from anybody in Israel about the book. That's it.
Yeah, that is it for questions. It is not it for signing books.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you need to give this man an incredible amount of applause.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for checking out Truth or Talk and bearing with us today. We just listened to the audio of Miko Peled. As we said in the intro, we still have our good friend and correspondent Sarah Sotomayor with us here today. So, hey Virstyne, hey Sarah, how you guys doing?
Good, how are you?
Well, all right. And thanks again, Sarah, for bringing that video to my attention. We played the audio clip from that lecture that he gives, because I think that's a really good, concise way for people to kind of understand this horrible thing that's going on in the Gaza Strip right now, the Gaza conflict.
And I hope that people take this as a chance to really get some insight into it, because it's really frustrating too, because I feel that there's some anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish behavior in the movement. I think people want to use Zionism as an excuse to be anti-Jewish people. So, I've seen people, make very general comments about all Jewish people based on, their sentiments about Zionism, and it can just get really, we've been fed, when you wake up and you realize that we've been lied to on so many levels. You know how the news works. You know that they lie, and we've had reporters to come out and say that they lie, and that they've been fired for trying to tell the truth. So it's not a conspiracy. So think about where you get your information and who owns where you get your information from, right?
And who benefits from it.
And who benefits from it. I mean, I think those are very fair, very simple questions, to ask. It's common sense, really. It's not really, really hard. But people have a lot of emotional attachment.
For sure.
In the wrong ways to it, because emotional attachment necessarily isn't bad, but it just depends on where it's coming from,
And I've heard a lot of the people kind of will justify the as you're saying, the anti-Jewish behavior of just classifying all Jews into this Zionist category, and they'll say because there are these things written in the Talmud, which is like their Bible, but I'd say, with that token, isn't there a lot of stuff written in the Bible too? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much you want to take that literally, as far as how everybody thinks. Just because they were born Jewish doesn't necessarily mean that they think or believe in everything that was written in the Talmud. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I agree. I mean, coming from just what I've seen and people who I follow, I haven't seen any upset towards Jewish people in general. I've seen it towards Zionism and showing how brainwashed they are from the get-go. But not really against the Jewish people. They view it as totally separate. Judaism and Zionism, a totally separate thing. But that's just from who I'm seeing. There could be, dissent. And if there are people like that, you need to take a second look. Because it's not these people. There are Semitic Jews who used to live in Iran or in certain parts of the Middle East that are now being occupied, who weep for the destruction of the country that they lived in. So, we have to look at it from all angles. That's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, and that's where I'm saying I don't see it much in the leaders or the people in the alternative media doing it as much as I've seen it as just individual truthers. But it's hard to say because as we experienced, what was it, a week ago we had, or the last week we had just a number of trolls on the fan page, so it's hard to tell if these people are paid skeptics or if they're just weirdos, or if they're and people will just say obnoxious weird things, and so a lot of it, what you see in the social media, you have to kind of take with a grain of salt, because people are coming on saying these really anti-hateful Jewish, hateful against Jews. You got to go, well, is this person for real? But I think that Virstyne and I have known people who will say things, and we're kind of that's a little borderline,
I know.
We're kind of taking it a little too far, as far as being hating on all Jewish people as if they're all Zionist. And I think if you can take what Joe Biden said and say you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist, I think the opposite is true as well. You don't have to be a Zionist if you're a Jew.
Yeah.
Because it's a religion and it's a race, which means that you're born. You can be born into it. You know.
I'm gonna correct you a little bit. It's more of an ethnic group, not a race, but a religion and an ethnic group, I would say.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so, but I'm just saying, my point is that you can be born into it. It doesn't even necessarily. You don't even necessarily have to follow their teachings as far as that goes. And but there is a lot. I would say. I mean, growing up, I had a really good friend in high school who was Israeli, and her family was incredibly racist. I mean, no joke. They didn't like me at all because I'm not Jewish. She wasn't able to hang out with Jewish people, or I'm sorry, the opposite. She wasn't able to hang out with non-Jewish people unless there was another Jewish friend around. So anytime we wanted to go out, she always had to invite one of her Jewish friends. To tag along, because otherwise her parents didn't trust it, and and not only, I mean, she couldn't date outside the race, she couldn't do it. It was just, so I'm not saying that that's how all Israelis are, but I'm just saying that was a personal experience. I saw that firsthand. There was an incredible amount of racism on the other end of it, So, and they seemed very privileged. They had a lot of money and everything. They were very, into the appearance of their home and the appearance of everything, as far as I could tell. And, and didn't particularly like me, and they weren't very nice to me, and it was, I didn't really think of it at the time. I didn't know anything about Zionism back then. So,
mean people, right? And then,
I didn't know. I just thought it was just their, just them. I didn't know that it was actually how this Zionist attitude is that, sort of an above others, and it's a divide and conquer thing. We're better than them, so we're going to we want to keep our heritage or lineage clear or clean or whatever. It's however they describe that. They don't want to have mixing. So they don't want you to be outside, even friends. It wasn't obviously we weren't going to have children together, but they didn't even want my influence.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? They were afraid.
No, I was taking a course and we had to do the study group, and I remember somebody in the study group was very was like that because he was looking for a roommate because I guess he was going to have to move from wherever he was living, and then we were trying to help him find a roommate. Well, we offered to help him find a roommate, but he didn't want to live with anybody that wasn't Jewish. It wasn't kosher. And then he got upset because his sister was marrying somebody that wasn't Jewish. And he came in we were like, oh, what's wrong? And he's like, oh, my sister's marrying this guy. And we're like, does he beat her? Does he steal her money? What does he do? And he's like, he's not Jewish. And we're like, what? That's it?
That's the least of your worries.
Yeah, are you kidding?
Well, it's kind of like a reversed. It's almost acceptable on their side of it to have this open racism. Is the point? I think they can tell you to your face. I mean, can you imagine if it was a white guy and he was saying, "My sister's marrying a black man"? You know how you would react to that? You'd be like, "Well, what do you mean? I'm black. That's offensive."
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But then
the Israeli. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was done. Go ahead.
The Israeli government is also, the Israeli Zionist government is incredibly racist to the black Jewish people.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
So Zionism doesn't really discriminate. It's hate just to Palestinians or to Arab people.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the whole divide and conquer thing that's been used. I'm just not. It's been time again all over the world. I see it with black people.
It's getting really boring.
Yeah. It's lame because you can see it now. You're like, it's like I've seen that movie 20,000 times already. But it's interesting when you start to study history and you really see the patterns just kind of go on in front of your face, and it's funny because I hated history when I was growing up because, especially being a black woman, you're so underrepresented and you're so made to look weak and insignificant that you dread history until you get up and you or get out and you become older and then you start to seek out your own history. It's really empowering, but you're not taught that in school. There are a lot of things that are kept from us in order to
And you're not taught, like, the true history. Like, I think it would have been pretty interesting to know about the CIA Operation Northwoods in great detail, or Operation Paperclip and IG Farben. You know, that would have made things a lot more interesting. But it's so dry that they make you not even want to look into it.
Instead of George Washington chopping down that cherry tree, because we really need to, right?
Yeah,
I don't know
which is probably bullshit. Yeah, they did, but that's probably it was probably bullshit.
They
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Still? Jeez, you think? Wow, that says something. I think.
Yeah,
that they're still teaching that
like
about George Washington.
It's just like regurgitated. Like it's just regurgitated.
For reals. And, you know, and speaking of when you're getting into the intelligence group and everything, I haven't really dug into this. Maybe you have, Sarah, a little bit, or Virstyne, is the aspect of a lot of people will want to bring up Israel in their intelligence with regards to 9/11, and I know that there is some record that there was some involvement, but I haven't gone past that point. So I don't really have the details on it, but I do know that there were some Israelis that were arrested for cheering after the towers went down. And
I heard about that.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that, you know, a lot of people in the truth movement, you know, they came into understanding Zionism through waking up about 9/11, because there was some involvement. And I thought in the Miko Peled lecture at the end, when he's doing the Q&A, so one person asked him is about, you know, the American government and how is it the American government's policies, are they controlling Zionism, or is it the other way around? And he flat out said Zionism is controlling American politics. And I thought that was really interesting, the way that he said that. And I thought, that really kind of leads you into a discussion about this with regards to 9/11, because that certainly did benefit the American government, but in ways it also has benefited the Israelis.
Well, just as a side... Sorry,
go ahead.
Just as a side note, most of our government officials have dual citizenship with Israel. So what does that say? Where do their allegiances really lie? What, you know, what are they,
So they're heavily personally invested in this cover-up, and that's why we're not getting the true story about what's going on over there. We're not being told that this is ethnic cleansing. What we're being fed is this BS that these Palestinian people are attacking the Israelis and that they're just doing it in defense, when really it's the other way around. Because it's like, I used this analogy with Virstyne the other day. We were talking, and I said, you know, it's like if we were married to a man who was 7 feet tall, and he was very oppressive and abusive and didn't give us water and made us and then all of a sudden we walked up to him and tried to push him. Well, first of all, you know, did we provoke him to then turn around and beat the shit out of us? No, because he provoked it by his being suppressive and oppressing us and denying us, you know, access to food and water and just basic human needs. So when, you know, people are being denied their rights and then they're just trying to say, you know, I've had enough, I'm going to push you. And then you go, okay, well, fine, it's on now. I'm going to just go ahead and just destroy and obliterate your home and burn down your house, you know, and rape your dog or whatever they're doing. It's like,
kill your mother.
Yeah, I know.
Right. I mean, it's just crazy. They just take it so over the top that it's like, it's
all because they threw a rock and dented their bloody tank. You know?
Yeah.
Like that's what caused this whole thing. Okay,
right.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, so I mean, the point is that, you know, even if you can say, well, they had some provocation, or even if the Palestinians did provoke it, is it a fair fight? You know, or is it me going up, you know, at 5'2", going up against a guy who's 7 feet tall? You know, it's like, is that a fair fight? You know, if I would walk up and push a guy that was that big, he'd probably what are you doing? Like, you know, he'd just relax. He'd be like, relax, you know, because it wouldn't even hurt him, right? But so it's not even fair. So at what point do they have a moral obligation to go, these guys don't even have an army, they're pretty much defenseless. Maybe we shouldn't really do what we're doing and just destroy everything, and destroy all their shit. It's just not fair. Mm-hmm. And so it's, then it becomes like, is it even really about who started it? Or is it just about, like, what's right is right? Mm-hmm. And I just don't think it's right what they're doing. So so we are going to go ahead and close out and wrap up for today, but we're going to leave you guys with, I want to say it's about 15-minute audio from a video called The Best of Finkelstein. We wanted to get Norman Finkelstein on the show, but he's been really, really busy. So I don't know if it's going to be in this round of interviews or if it's going to be in the next round of interviews. So hopefully we'll get him on eventually. We'll track him down. We'll stalk him if we have to. But Norman Finkelstein is a Jewish man. He's actually the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, and he's a very outspoken activist. He's a professor, a college professor. He's a very brilliant man. He's very well researched on this particular subject. And I like him a lot because he doesn't give a shit what people think about him. He's not worried about kissing anybody's ass ever. It's just, I like that in a person. Me too. And it's just sort of, but he backs it up. He knows what he's talking about. There are a lot of lectures people can. I didn't want to do 2 lectures because we don't have enough time. Plus, I thought that the Miko Peled lecture was enough that you guys could get the gist of what was going on. And then, but you can find Norman Finkelstein's lectures as well on the history of Zionism and so forth. But we're going to just leave you with this, so hopefully people will look him up and look at the work that he's done over the years and sort of see the really sound research that he's done on the subject and get some historical background and all of that. And just see the truth, figure out what's right and what's really going on here. So, Sarah, thank you again. Hopefully we can bring you back on it in a couple of weeks and talk about this again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we always love to have you on. So, before you go, what's your blog spot again, or your WordPress blog?
Sarah's healingjourney.wordpress.com.
Okay, perfect. So that's where you guys can find Sarah. And Sarah Sotomayor, thanks for being on the show today. Till next time, peace, truth, and love, y'all.
Peace, truth, love you guys. Bye.
During your speech, you made a lot of references to Jewish people as well as certain people in your audience, not Jewish people in general, but certain people, especially in your audience, to Nazis. Now, that is extremely offensive when certain people are German, and they're also extremely offensive to people who've actually suffered under Nazi rule.
I don't respect that anymore. I really don't. I don't like and I don't respect the crocodile tears to the crocodile tears. No. I'm sorry, folks. Allow me to finish and allow me to finish. Listen, sir. Allow me to finish. Sir. I don't like to play before an audience the Holocaust card. But since now I feel compelled to. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother, please shut up. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother was in my concentration camp. Every single member of my family on my father's side,
The Jews did not take arms against the Jews.
not for what she's done.
We're talking to Professor Alan Dershowitz. He's author of a new book. It's called The Case for Israel, in debate with Norman Finkelstein. Among his books, The Holocaust Industry and Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict.
Now, in 1984, one Joan Peters published a book called From Time Immemorial. The book was universally recognized by serious scholars to be a fraud. Without wanting to toot my own horn, I'm widely recognized as the person who exposed the fraud. I know that book inside out. I read it at least 4 times, and I went through all 1,854 footnotes. I started to read your book, Mr. Dershowitz. I then came to Chapter 1, footnotes 10, footnote 11, footnote 12, footnote 13, footnote 14, footnote 15, footnote 16. All of the quotes are from Joan Peters. They are so from Joan Peters that you have a long quote here from Mark Twain on pages 23 to 24. Mm-hmm. I turn to Joan Peters, page 159 to 60. The identical quote from Twain with the ellipses
is the Twain quote wrong?
With the ellipses, let me finish, wrong? Sir. No, but the key with the ellipses in the same places. The identical quote from Twain with the ellipses in the same places.
It's been widely quoted, as you know.
Really, now, Mr. Dershowitz?
What's your point? Is it a correct quote?
Let me finish, Mr. Dershowitz.
I want to ask you a question. Is it an accurate quote of Twain? Let's be very clear. It is not plagiarism to quote Mark Twain correctly.
Except if you cite Mark Twain and not Joan Peters. I'm a professor, sir. I know what plagiarism is.
Mr. Finkelstein, in 1948, the UN approved the partition of the State of Israel into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Jordan to the west and Egypt to the south had both previously been created and tacked first upon the creation of the State of Israel. Egypt and Jordan had the opportunity between 1948 and 1967 to create a Palestinian state. Why was there not the same response when the region was under Jordanian and Egyptian control?
Mm-hmm. You know, I want to just say, young man, I'm not in any way trying to be insulting. I'm way past that. I want to end the conflict, and I want to be reasonable. But it does trouble me, and I want you to think about it. You come here with canned questions. I gave a lecture, I spoke for around an hour, and there was a large amount of material in what I had to say. You don't even listen. You just come in here with a prepared question that has nothing whatsoever to do with what I was speaking about. It's as if I were giving a lecture on particle physics and you were coming here and talking about botany. You don't even listen. You really have to, in my opinion, open your mind and listen. You're not looking at an enemy here. And you shouldn't come in my opinion, you shouldn't come in with these canned questions which Hillel gives you or some other organization to prepare you. Listen and think for yourself. And then I think we can make some progress. Think for yourself. Where was I unreasonable? What statement of mine was factually untrue? What did I misrepresent? How did I try to pull the wool over the eyes of the audience? I could sit down here now and speak to you at great length about what happened in 1947 and thereafter. But I didn't provide any background material to give an answer to a question like that. I didn't lecture on the topic. It's absolutely meaningless now for me to answer that question. Most people in the room don't even know what you're referring to. I wonder if I can comment on that.
No, I'm afraid you can't comment on that. I'm sorry, because I've got a question for... I've got to keep this...
Let me just add one point.
I'll give you a chance in a minute, Mr. Finkelstein. I'm going to give you a question to work from, because I want to make sure as many people in the audience feel honored as we can possibly manage. This writer says the Intifada is not an isolated problem. This problem is affected by 4 wars, terrorism, and the Holocaust. Why is it not relevant, in your opinion, for Israel to be secure?
Well, that nicely brings me back to the former question. I'll answer that. And I'll answer both at the same time. I suppose it wasn't missed on anyone in the audience that Mr. Blitzer was deploying that same familiar lawyer's tactic. The question that was put to him was, if we accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel, why don't we also accept the legitimacy of a Palestinian state?